A rusting observatory has sat beneath the waves for thousands of years, the relic of a long-dead civilization. Once, it was the pinnacle of advanced science, but its people and their knowledge are gone and forgotten. The observatory recorded the night sky and was that people's attempt to find a way to navigate the stars. When a group of adventurers stumbles upon the ruin and investigates the watery depth, they find that it contains a map and a glimpse of a much greater cosmos. The very cataclysm that destroyed the lost civilization broke the observatory and accidentally created the perfect conditions to record, if only for a split second, the very thing they sought: the branches of the legendary world tree. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan, and today we are discussing the Astral Plane, wild space, and the vast starry sky of a D&D world. I'll be creating another map of the cosmology of my own world, which I started last week with the introduction of the map of the planes, and I'll be talking about how I make a handout map that my players can find, puzzle over, and eventually use to venture out into the cosmos. This is a part of a series of videos on cosmological maps, how to map and explore different parts of a very large universe. So, while I start with a black sheet of paper and a white pencil, let's talk astral. Last week we dealt with planar travel and discussed how the idea of planes were deeply woven into the history of both Dungeons & Dragons and real-world philosophies. And this week I'm doing something a bit more ambitious, using tools that I've never used on camera before to try to make a map that's going to blow my players' minds. I'm going to map out the world tree. When you're dealing with high-level players, you start to have to reach out beyond the bounds of cities and kingdoms, out into a wider universe. So I can't really justify keeping my group locked up. Last week, I created a map of the elemental planes, in which I included the heavens and the hells and the overlapping planes of the Feywild and the Shadowfell. And while that's a great initial guide to the concept of planes, and I mentioned that the astral realms exist in that map, the concept of an astral plane is so large that it really needs to have its own map. I want to create something that moves the plot forward, creates a puzzle for my players to discuss amongst themselves, and fills out the world building of a whole universe, which is a pretty tall order, and for which I'm going to have to be a little imaginative. So I'm going to make two maps in one of the night sky and of the constellations that can be seen from the ground, and one of the astral winds that make up the world tree, so that players can move more easily through the astral plane and navigate the branches of the tree. But before we go into all of that, let's talk about what the astral plane and the world tree are and how they fit into Dungeons & Dragons. So that everyone's aware, the astral plane is something that exists well outside of Dungeons & Dragons. It's far from being made up for this particular role-playing game, and it has a very long and complex history and is parts of dozens of theologies and philosophies. Concepts like it exist in Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and many more. And ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle talked about the celestial bodies being composed of a different element from the major four, the same element that the human soul was made of. They suggested that in addition to fire, air, water, and earth, the substance of the human soul was made of an ethereal element, and that element made up the planets like Mars and Jupiter, and the stars. A lot of the time, the astral plane in history is discussed through the lens of out-of-body experiences, of meditation and near-death experiences. We're talking about how people can leave their bodies and wander around. Now in D&D, technically, you're talking about the ethereal plane when you talk about out-of-body experiences. And the astral plane, for a lot of D&D's history, deals with a very small, enclosed, timeless, gravityless microplane that happens to connect all of them. But D&D's cosmology, focusing around the astral plane, is a little bit more complicated and contradictory than that. In the last episode, we talked about the history of the planes in Dungeons & Dragons, and the astral plane is depicted in the oldest official cosmologies as a permeation and connection of all of the other planes. However, some specific books have really expanded and focused on it, opening it up for exploration, starting really with the 1996 Guide to the Astral Plane, which gave it rules for astral travel, gravity, and the Githyanki. But things get a little bit murky in official law because technically the astral plane and wild space, which is the closest thing we have to space, and the phlogiston, a cosmic river that connects worlds, are all different explanations and ideas that are connected to stars. Various editions have come up with new explanations and combined old ones and ignored others, and it all just goes to remind us that Dungeons & Dragons is a storytelling tool. So let's break down these individual ideas and talk about them more specifically. The astral plane, despite using the word astral, which means stars, is not a plane that connects stars. It is a microplane that permeates the others. You can travel to it from anywhere in the multiverse, and within it, there is no time. In some editions, as soon as you leave, the time that you spent there catches up with you, but that's not necessarily the case all the time. There are no stars within it, and there are only the bodies of dead gods and the Githyanki, who rule an empire. Wild space is introduced as the chaotic void that exists between material planes. When you go on a Spelljammer ship, you sail through wild space, but it gets a little more complicated as well, because you would, in addition, have the phlogiston, a cosmic river, a literal sea that you can sail that connects different systems. And none of these are a complete explanation for what exists in the night sky, or how things orbit and interact with one another. They're just explanations for how Spelljammer ships can connect different material planes like Greyhawk on the Forgotten Realms. So when I make this map, I'm going to have to choose one of these cosmologies or make my own, which brings us to the world tree. The world tree is a very famous example of cosmology in mythology, an explanation for what exists in the world and how it exists. The most famous world tree, but by far not the only one, is the Yggdrasil, which comes from Norse mythology as a connection between the 9 realms. It's ruled from Asgard, but all of the people of Midgard on our world, as well as the others in places like Niflheim or Svartalfheim, all exist as parts of the world tree. They're all connected in this enormous organism. Now, I quite like this explanation for a force which surrounds us and penetrates us and connects everything in some way. And I wanted to use that and combine it with other ideas. But I'll talk about that more in a little while. Now, in making my map, I started out by going out and buying a nice large A2 sheets of black paper, 180 GSM, and an assortment of white inks and pencils. Now, you can theoretically do this in black and white. You could even do it on a white sheet of paper and use graphite and fine liner pens and then scan it and then just use the negative exposure when you process it digitally. But in this case, I wanted to go for a broader feel, and I didn't want to work in color in this particular instance, despite the fact that it would have worked quite well for the nebulae. In any case, I wanted to make 2 maps, one mundane map of the night sky and one which was a more cosmological understanding. And to achieve that, I'm going to first use the white pencil shading to create clouds of nebulae and the deeper, more dense cores of those clouds. That will give us the shape of the roots and the branches of the world tree. Using the white pen, I'll outline systems on the map and I'll label them, and then I'll use uninhabited stars to create constellations. There are 2 major clouds of the nebulae, which I'm aiming to make look like a tree in the end, so I'll have a thinner curved band on the left where the roots will be, and a much thicker, bushier expanse of them on the right in the branches. It will make the map look a little bit unbalanced, but that'll be all right later when you see the tree itself. I'm using circles of different sizes when I make the systems to denote how many people inhabit that system. The size of the circle is how dense the system is. Larger ones towards the core mean there are more people living there, with systems getting smaller and smaller as they move to the exterior of the tree. The idea is that if you sail along the branch of the world tree and you come to quite a small system, there'll be much fewer people there. It could be just one outpost, even one tiny village on the edge of space. Whereas if you go to one of the larger circles, you'll get an entire physical plane, like the one that my players are exploring on Aurea. And the details for those systems can be put in the circles. For the moment, I'm leaving it blank, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But now we're going to go into why I'm doing the constellations and the rest of the process before I circle back around and talk about the lore. The constellations that I'm doing are more for decoration than anything else. It's the reason that I'm making the map beyond the secret reason, which is the world tree. I need a reason to give it to the players that they won't question. So if they stumble across the ruins of the observatory and they don't figure out how to turn the equipment on or how to activate the map, then they'll get a nice little illustration of what the night sky looks like, as well as the major stars and how they're labeled. But I didn't want this map to be influenced by one culture over another. I didn't want it to alter mythology or be too complicated or overpowering in the constellations. So I just used objects rather than legendary heroes or gods as the subjects of the constellation. Throughout human history, if you make a study of constellations, you'll note that they're generally used as a tool in oral tradition and storytelling. The stars mark the great heroes or gods and their achievements. In this case, I didn't really want to fill my map with that because it would take too long, it would be too complicated. So I just used things like shields, boats, chariots, etc. There's also a compass in there because we're the red quills. And once I've got all of that done, that's the mundane part of the map. And I can then turn my attention to the real reason the map is there. That's the fruit of the branches, the leaves on the trees, the filling around the borders of the map. But then I'm going to use the Moonlight pens from the Shop of Many Things. And a shout out to them. I'm so pleased to be using these pens. They're a great tool. I'm going to connect the systems together using the branches and the roots of the world tree. And drawing a tree is honestly really, really simple. And the biro shape of the pen lends itself to a rougher kind of style that looks as though it's 1,000 threads being woven together, which really, really works for the style of this map. And when you're drawing the tree, you just need to remember that the trunk's width is no larger or smaller than the width of all of its branches. If you maintain that rule consistently along it, you'll come up with a nice tree, and yours will look quite nice when you're finished up. And then, of course, once I've done the branches and I finish labeling everything, I'll add in a few hidden details. So the map can be used to look at the night sky, given to the players just as a world-building tool. But when they get certain tools, or if they head to a certain location, it will show them how to navigate between worlds. And so that now that we've talked about how we're making the map, let's talk about how you can bring it into your story. Let's give an example of how you might find it and use it. The night sky, stretching overhead, is a constant reminder of the vastness of the cosmos. Our world is but one small corner of a much larger universe, where colliding planes and clouds of cosmic gases dwarf the fields and forests of our home. It's a wonderful, dangerous place and does not reward the foolish and unwary. But sometimes, when there's no other choice, the call of adventure leads up to that starry expanse. Legend has held for millennia that all of creation, the planes, the stars, and the material plane are connected in one enormous living organism. They call it the world tree, the vast permeation of life and energy that thrums through all living things. Worlds hang from its branches like fruits, and all of the wondrous universe is its soil. However, though this story has persisted throughout history, passed from generation to generation as myth and legend, there is said to be a map of the branches of this titanic organism. Deep beneath the waves, in the ruins of an advanced and forgotten civilization, an ancient calamity has left a subtle mark. In the rusting bronze contraptions of their observatory, a group of adventurers find a star map showing the night sky. When they accidentally activate the contraption, it shines with light just for a moment, long enough to fill that astral map with the branches of the world tree. They leave the sunken ruin of Peldothere and return to the surface, clutching the discarded remnants of the dead civilization. The outcome of all their mastery and science, achieved only through cataclysm and held now by their savage and unlearned descendants. And so the adventurers find a map that can lead them through the astral realms, if they can only find a ship built to sail the world tree. So, in the end, I've made a map of mundane and astral features that can be given to the players to lead them through the astral plane and connect it to the history and world building that I've been laying down in previous maps. In the end, I combined many of the astral concepts of D&D and tidied them up to fit into my own world building as was intended. The astral realms in my cosmology are a combination of the astral plane, wild space, and the phlogiston. The astral plane is the dead space between the roots and the branches. The wild space is the cloud of stars and gases, and the roots, trunk, and branches of the world tree can be sailed like the phlogiston. It's not a perfect model, but it works for my world. And what's more, you can use this map to give your own inspiration to the world. It is available for free for download on my Patreon. The link is in the description below. The use of the UV ink in the Moonlight pens allowed me to create this handout to give to my players with that avid level of immersion. It also allows me to give it to them even if they haven't figured out how to read it, as it'll just be a picture of the night sky then. I've got the star circles that I can use to add details of what can be found where later on as they start navigating and if they have particular aims and goals. And just as in the previous video, I want to give a shout out to the Shop of Many Things for letting me use their tools for this video. The Moonlight pens worked well. They vanish when they're not being used under UV light. They can't be seen, and it's an amazing tool to give the player something that can be revealed later. They can puzzle over it. They can be immersed in it. The world can suck them in and spit them out. And I'm keen to show this to my players and see whether or not they can figure it out. Now, if you have your own realm projects that you're working on, I would love to see them. You can share them with me and my fellow map makers on the Red Quills Discord. We discuss upcoming projects. We talk about what we're working on. We share images. There's a link in the description below if you want to join the community. Of course, take a look at my Patreon for this downloadable and all other downloadables in this series. If you want to download a digital version of this map, if you want to see more of my notes, if you want to have a say in what topics I do, if you want to comment or discuss things with me. And of course, if you've got thoughts or inspiration or questions, leave a comment below. Please like and subscribe for more map making tutorials. We're going to be continuing this series for the next few weeks on creating cosmological maps for your D&D campaign. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back next week.